All right, so the recording has started. I am going to open up the slideshow. So again, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to talk about a short history of Les Halles, and from the perspective of the Belle Epoque and Émile Zola, whose novel Le Ventre de Paris, The Belly of Paris, is set almost entirely in this area, and I'll talk more about this painting and a lot of other things as well. So why are we talking about this? I'm going to say it up front, partly, well, because I love the history of Paris and I love this area and I love Zola. But we are running our Paris Cafe Culture Tour from October 11th to 17th, 2024, with our tour partner Worldwide Quest, and doing activities to help prepare for that. And if you've been thinking about the tour and wondering what we're going to do on it, it includes 4 custom walks with our longtime walking tour partner Lisa Passold, and the stories she has of people and their good deeds and their not so good deeds are super fun to listen to. A visit of the Musée Carnavalet, which is about the history of Paris, recently totally renovated, a multi-year renovation, and just a wonderful introduction to 19th century cultural history. We have a lot of other stuff as well, including a cooking class with Frederic, who's amazing. He will get you, whether you have a good cooking skills or no cooking skills, he's going to get you cooking really well by the end of the time, and lots of other activities. So again, later I'll turn off the recording and happy to take any questions about our tour. But for today, we are going to be talking about Les Halles. And so I mentioned here the Belle Epoque Unvarnished. Feel free to chime in when you hear Belle Epoque, or what comes to mind, and anyone feel free to chime in. Anything that comes to mind.
1890s, 1880s, 1910, that time frame.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's
Yeah.
a good time frame. And what do you and what visuals come to mind when you hear this phrase?
I think of opulence.
Okay. Yeah.
At least in the U.S. I'm not sure about Paris, but
yeah, I think about Degas and Montmartre, the Moulin Rouge, all of that life that was going on then.
Yeah, absolutely. All these were prominent, prominent in our popular imagination today, and were prominent at the time. And so you can see a little bit of that. And this is a 1910 painting by Luigi Loire of the Night Cafe, it's called, and you see a classic cafe on the Grand Boulevard. Okay, so what does that mean? I'm going to talk about that. So when we think of the Belle Epoque, or the Second Empire, so the Second Empire starting in 1851 or 2, I've suddenly forgot, with Louis Napoleon, the Napoleon III, and we think a lot of housemen, right? And we think of this kind of building with the wrought iron balconies, with these multi-story apartment buildings that are flanking large, wide boulevards and avenues. And and more specifically, these constructions being made in the second half of the 19th century, these things being built, the old Paris, more medieval Paris, being destroyed, and these things being built. And that did happen for sure. Of course, history is always more complicated than that, and we're really going to stay focused on Les Halles, so I can't get into all of it. But we'll see the picture is slightly more complicated. So, but we do think of these Haussmann structures. From George Haussmann was the prefect of the Seine for quite some time during this second part of the 19th century, and was the main figure overseeing this redevelopment of very large areas of Paris. And so what was on these boulevards? Well, we saw it a little bit with the painting that I showed just a couple minutes ago. And this is an 1875 painting by the Russian painter Ilya Repin. And so what was on these boulevards were things like these grand cafes, and things that we associate very much with cafes today: the marble top tables, the big plate glass windows, the terraces, the lighting, things like plate glass, wrought iron, which we'll talk more about. These were newer technologies, and people were out and about on these grand cafes in a very, here you see very elaborately dressed people going out at night, for maybe after the theater perhaps. And this was just one slice of what was a new way of having leisure time and of a new way of entertaining yourself in large cities like Paris. And again, I'm really simplifying because I do want to stick to Les Halles. So we think of a lot of these things when we think of the Belle Epoque. But then there's other facets too. And Zola was concerned with all of these facets. He wrote a lot about the cafes, about the new department stores like Galeries Lafayette. He wrote about it all. But one of the things he was very interested in a way that maybe hadn't been done as much before, was writing about the working class of Paris. And one of the main ways he did that was through his novels, the Belle of Paris, set in Les Halles, and a few other novels too, like the Assommoir, Germinal. Those are a different seminar, but anyway, so he's really in the Belle of Paris and his descriptions of Les Halles, he's really trying to show in a way that hadn't been done before, what Paris in the second half of the 19th century was like, especially for the working class. So let's get a little basis on, okay, what is Les Halles? And you might be wondering, Melanie, isn't it Les Halles? Because isn't the H silent in French words? And for a lot of words that start with H, yes, it is. So you would say l'hôtel, right? The hotel, and hotels, plural hotels, would be les hôtels. I would make that liaison. But there's some H words, including al, where you don't. So it would be la halle, the hall, and les halles, the halls. So that's, if you were wondering that is why. And so this is, I know of a lot of text here. This is, after this, I'm going to focus on images, but just want to get some basics down. So Les Halles, although went through many transformations, was quite old. It was had about an 800-year history in the center of Paris. So you can see in just a very basic timeline here, in 1137 we have the establishment of this dry goods market, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And then another major kind of development with Philippe Auguste in 1183, expanding the size of the market, and trying to make it more hygienic. Because we often have this idea like, oh, people didn't care about hygiene in the Middle Ages. They did. I mean, they didn't always have good solutions, right? But they did care, and they were trying to make things more hygienic. By buying this Saint-Lazare fair, which was a little bit north of where the Les Halles market site was, Philippe Auguste was able to expand an aqueduct and connect it to what's now the Fontaine des Innocents. I'll show a picture of that. If you've been to Paris, I think you will have recognized it. A beautiful fountain that's being renovated in time for the Olympics this July. So Philippe Auguste, who was a major developer of Paris, like he, Haussmann definitely was not the only one. We see waves and waves of development. We see creations of large boulevards and avenues before Haussmann, as well as during the Haussmann time. Market continues to expand. It remained largely a dry goods market and a place for money changing as well. You see, there were drapers, mercers, and curriers, people dealing with leather working with development under Louis IX or Saint Louis. And throughout this whole period through the 1700s, the market is constantly changing and expanding, but generally not in proportion with the growth of Paris. And I'm going to come back to this timeline in a second. I just want to show you a few images first to illustrate some of this earlier history. Oops, there we go. So just to orient you a little bit, so this site where Louis Le Gros put the market, it's now what is the Rue des Petits Champs. At the time, the area where the market was established was called the Champeaux, the little fields. So Champeaux, Petits Champs, that's the same thing, little fields. And you can see this is roughly the site of where this Champeaux would be. It had been a swampy area. And at the time, when the market was established in 1137, it would be outside the city walls. I couldn't find a map from 1137, but I do have one here from 1180 during the time of Philippe Auguste. And you can see him there. And you can see how tiny Paris is, right? And we have the city walls here. And the Les Halles area would be, I believe, around here. Move forward in time just a little, like 1300s, you can see it's growing some, the city's growing some, and here you would have the market area. So just north of here's where Notre Dame would be, or sorry, here's where Notre Dame would be. Here's the end of the island where the Ile de la Cité, and so it's just north of that. And then just again a little bit more context. The city in 1422 imposed kind of on the larger city, so growing but still quite small. And here you have the area around there. Just to orient you, so here is the Place de la Concorde for those who, and the Boulevard des Italiens, just to orient you a little bit. So let's go back. Oh, and sorry, and then here you have the area being built up a little bit. You can see there is more build up by the 1550s. So I'm going to go back to our timeline just for a minute. So you have a pretty small Paris for a lot of this time, but still growing. In 1543, there's another major reconstruction under Francois I. And at this time, the market doesn't look like what we might think of today. A lot of it consists of houses that have covered galleries on the ground level. And these become known as the piliers des halles. And I'll show a picture of those later on. More expansion under Louis XVI, another big developer. He creates a new corn exchange, that's the Halles au Blé. And he also has this cemetery of the Innocents, what had been a cemetery for children, turned into a market for flowers, vegetables, and fruit. And so I'll go back to I'll go back to that image in a second. Napoleon, also another big developer, for lack of a better word. He had some major renovations to the market. He moved the slaughterhouses that were there to the edge of the city, and tried to reorganize the market, putting in a new central hall. So over time, you see it is moving from mostly a dry goods market to a market that also had food items. And when I'll read some excerpts from Zola, and we'll talk about just the enormous quantities of vegetables, butter, eggs, cheese, meat, fish that were sold at this market. So let me just go up in time. Oops, sorry. So here again, we have that around 1550. So we have these, you can kind of see these houses that would have these galleries in them. And you have here the Cemetery of the Innocents. And just to give you, there's not too many images that of the type I was looking for, but you can see here a little bit of what the market might have looked like in this 1782 painting, showing the main pillory, so like a pillory for punishment. But you can see here the market, the market around that area. And I hope this gives you a sense of, you can kind of see how you have this maybe crowded maze like medieval feel still in 1782. And so as I mentioned, at one point the Cemetery of the Innocents was turned into a market that became the Marché des Innocents, at just adjacent to the site of Les Halles. And then that Marché des Innocents lasted from 1785 to 1858. And you can, here is the fountain that I talked about earlier, the Fontaine des Innocents, this very distinctive square fountain. So it will be reopened in time for the Olympics. Go see it. And it had fallen in disrepair for a long time. But you can kind of see here maybe getting closer to what we might think of as the Belle Epoque area, or Belle Epoque time market, with this image. And we're gonna focus a little bit on the timeline again, and then back to some images. So as I mentioned, this market was just not, it was constantly not sufficient. And, and even though renovations were being made, improvements in hygiene and other things were being made, the 1800s in particular saw a huge increase in the population of Paris, partly because of immigration from other parts of France, partly because of annexation of villages that were not part of the city, but then were incorporated into the city. So one of the most famous ones is Montmartre, right? Montmartre was a village that was eventually incorporated into the city of Paris. And there were many of these. And again, I'm kind of moving back and forth in time here, but just to give you a basic overview. So this city planners and officials and the authorities and were constantly thinking, well, we need a different market. This isn't working. And by the 1840s, it was really urgent to get to improve this market, which was now really the central food market for the city. And so they went about it in a very convoluted way, and I'm leaving out a lot here, but I'm just trying to hit some of the highlights. So there was an ordinance sign that was fixing the perimeters of Les Halles. I'll show picture of that here. So here you have the neighborhood in 1849, and showing the boundaries of what would become these new market pavilions. Here you have the boundaries shown here, so you can see, whoa, there's a lot of stuff that's in there already. Yeah, there is, and it's gonna be torn down. And here you have just next to it the Marché des Innocents, again with the fountain. And you can see these houses, right, with galleries in them that would be that had been the form of the market for some centuries. The church is Saint Eustache here, and it is of course still there. So they decide, all right, this is gonna be the boundaries of the market, and we're gonna have dedicated spaces, which they did have already, but they were just still reorganizing everything. So here you have a hall for fish, for eggs, for herbs and vegetables. So this is our plan, they say. And so they start on this plan in 1851. The first stone is laid according to a plan developed by Baltar, who won a competition to design this new market. I'll show that. So here, and I know that's a little bit blurry here, but here you have an image of Louis Napoleon, who was then president of the Republic and would soon become emperor in a coup. He dissolved the National Assembly, made himself president for 10 years, I think, at first, and then made himself emperor again. Votes were manufactured. That's a whole other story. But he's at this time he's president of the Republic. He later becomes emperor. But in 1851, he lays the first stone of the Halles Pavilion. People are gathered around to watch, and of course you have Saint Eustache Church in the background here. But in 1853, he demands that work stopped. He doesn't want the original plan anymore. He wants a new plan, and he wants, I'll come back to the other image in a second. What he gets is eventually this plan from Baltar, and he stops work because he's like, no, we need something like the Gare de l'Est. Let me explain a little bit of that. So we talked a little bit earlier about wrought iron and plate glass, and other types of glass too, being newer technologies that were used in building. I think one of the most famous early examples of these is the Crystal Palace in London. And people were crazy about this. I mean, it was just an amazing thing that you could build this way. We see it in the Eiffel Tower as well, right, with the wrought iron construction. But this building made of iron and glass, it was something that was a major innovation. The wife of Napoleon III, Eugénie, she was obsessed with this Crystal Palace, and also with the Gare de l'Est, the Eastern train station in Paris, which also had this wrought iron and glass construction. People really loved these, and you saw them in a smaller scale throughout Paris. And Lisa's going to talk a lot more about this. Covered arcades that had these that were covered by these ceilings of cast iron and glass. This was along with the Les Halles, these covered arcades going through individual streets were a new way of shopping, a new way of being out, especially for women. And people really loved them. So Napoleon wants, he doesn't want this kind of stone thing based structure anymore. He wants glass and cast iron. And so this was one of the This is one of the older kind of main pavilions from the old market. It's shown here in 1866, shortly before it would be demolished. So I'll take you back to the timeline here. Whoops, one more. So you have 1853. Okay, wait, stop. We're going to change. 1854, Belle Epoque presents this new conception that I showed with the 10 pavilions. And of course, this all takes a long time, right? These pavilions are constructed over the next 20 years. So we had in 1866, we're in the middle of this process, and this was going to be torn down and replaced with part of this. And these were eventually torn down as well. I'll get to that in a second. All but two, so there were 10 here, all but two were torn down, and the two were rebuilt, one in Japan and one, I believe this one in the suburb of Paris. So you can see here what they would have looked like. So we have this market that's being constructed through the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. Zola publishes, and here I'm gonna come back to Zola in a second, but Zola is publishing the Belle of Paris in 1873. So at the time of this, where we already have Les Halles, as they were known to many Parisians during the time of the Second Empire and the Belle Epoque. And it remained a hugely important market for the next century, as it had been since 1137. But there were many changes, and I'm way compressing here because we just don't have time, but someday I hope we can do a tour more focused on the 1950s and 60s. So you have a lot of changes that bring about the decline of the market. And there's many reasons, excuse me, but throughout these decades of the 20th century, the market is going to go into decline. It's getting the goods to the market becomes a complicated issue. You have the development of the RER, the regional, like a regional light rail network that connects Paris to its suburbs. The building of the ring road after World War II, competition from other types of from supermarkets, from other ways of buying food. So there's many factors, and I'm not an urbanist or an urban historian. I'm just giving a very general overview here. But the market really was in decline. And over time, parts of it were moved. The flower market, I think, was moved a little bit earlier than this, but eventually the main wholesale market was moved to this Paris suburb of Angy in 1960. And it becomes this big hole kind of in the center of the city. There's a lot of discussion and debate throughout the 60s, late 50s, 60s, and early 70s on what to do. People, you might not be surprised to hear that people cannot agree on what they should do, how much they should spend, all of this. But eventually, and again, I'm skipping over a lot, but maybe sometime we can cover the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The various pavilions are demolished as what's now the RER station of Châtelet-Les Halles is constructed, and that's the RER station is underground. And in 1979, this Forum des Halles project is chosen as the winner of another architectural competition that's held to determine what to do, what should be done with this area. So if you went to Paris in the 80s, the 90s, and don't worry, I'm going to come back to all this. You probably saw something like this. This might look familiar to a lot of you, with this kind of sunken area. Here it's shown in 2007, but this was from the 80s on. This in different parts were developed at different times, but this was the basic look. So you have Saint-Eustache there, right? And you had this mixed use area. There was a large parking lot, an underground parking lot. There were gardens. You can kind of see they're trying to echo the glass roofs here, and they're trying to echo it again here, with this kind of sunken shopping area. You might recognize here these kind of green trellises. That was a big part of the design. People though hated this design.
Ooh.
They hated it. And again, it was like, well, and it became, I think it didn't work out as planned. It became like the earlier market. It fell sort of into disrepair. It became a popular site for dealing drugs. It just wasn't, and it had definitely lost the energy that the market that we'll see depicted by Zola had. So Paris, the city, decided we have to do something about this. But again, it's like there's a lot. It took a long time, a lot of disagreement. But in 2004, they did launch another architectural competition that again featured a mixed use space with shopping, with housing, with gardens, with public areas. And the current one was chosen in 2004 with La Canopée, which I'll show you in a minute. And that was inaugurated in 2016. So you go today, so you would see this until pretty recently. This is what you would see. And here's a little bit of the construction. This was, I think, this was in 2009. I have to check there. And here you have a picture with La Canopée, the canopy in 2016. Most of the work was finished in 2018. And you can see, again, they're trying to, it seems to me anyway, they're trying to evoke that feeling of these glass roofs. With this and the shopping areas, you can see there's above ground shopping still. There's Sephora here. I love Sephora. And then there's underground shopping as well. I feel like I feel like this one is brighter, airier, more conducive to the kind of energy that was present in the old market. But I don't know, that's just my subjective opinion. But yeah, if you go now, you'll see this this renovated Les Halles. No, but still, again, no food market. That all those the retail and wholesale markets are still no longer present. But when they were something else. And that's what we're gonna move to Zola. And I'll talk a little bit about his perceptions of this market, and then we'll take some questions. So again, condensing a lot very quickly, but Zola had this whole series of novels about the Rougon-Macquart family that he wrote over a number of years. And The Belle of Paris was one of them. I think the third one that he published, and he was trying to cover all areas of French life in both Paris and outside of Paris. And he published the Belle of Paris in 1873. But he had this idea to write a novel focusing on the about
Oh,
Paris.
you're listening.
I am, and it's live.
Sorry, does someone have a question there? Okay, so this quote is from the introduction by Mark Kurlansky, taken from the introduction, and this is Zola as an older writer reflecting on his career. And he says, I dreamed of writing a novel of which Paris, with its oceans of roofs, would be a principal character, something like the chorus of antique Greek tragedies. And he considered Les Halles like his kind of underappreciated masterpiece, his best novel. Critics and scholars don't agree generally, but that's for everybody to decide. But Les Halles, what it does have, it is just incredibly evocative depictions of this market. So, and I just wanted to show here, and here you have maybe a more, perhaps we still get a little feeling, okay, yeah, this is an actual market where people go and food is brought in and they go every day and they buy their food, but maybe a little bit more sedate. And you can see here the glass constructions of Baltard. This is in 1879. But then you also have this depiction by Gonut, I believe, and show a detail here. And that's really what Zola was interested in for the Belle of Paris and in his explorations of Les Halles. And he was just an incredibly indefatigable researcher. He would join these vendors in the middle of the night as they got ready to drive their carts into Paris to bring in their stuff. And I'm going to read you just a few different excerpts from his novel to give you a sense of what it might have felt like to be in this market. So here, this is the protagonist of the Belle of Paris, Florent. He's been wrongly imprisoned for his wrongly accused and then imprisoned for involvement in the 1851 against the 1851 coup by Louis Napoleon, where Louis Napoleon eventually made himself emperor. So Florent has been imprisoned. He's now out of prison. He's returning to Paris after having been away for quite some time. And during this time, there have been a lot of these changes by housemen, Baltard, and other development in this very central part of Paris. So here we have Florent. In truth, he was happy to sit down there because moving around had started to revive his hunger. He sat down, leaning against a mound of cabbages by Madame Francois's stand. He told himself he would be just fine sitting there, waiting and not moving. His mind was a void, and he could not even say exactly where he was. In the beginning of September, the early morning was already remaining dark. The lanterns around him flickered in the dusky shadows. He was sitting by the side of a major street which he did not recognize. It vanished into the night's blackness. He could hardly see anything except the produce he had been entrusted to watch. Down the market lanes, he could make out only the outline of other heaps like a flock of sheep. In the middle of the route, blocking the street, he could see the outline of carts. From one end to the other, he could smell what he could not exactly see, a line of horses breathing in the dark. Shouts, a piece of wood or an iron chain hitting the pavement, the thumping of vegetables unloaded from wagons, and wheels scraping as carts were backed against the curb. These sounds loaded the still air with the exciting promise of dawn awakening. And then Florent, so there, he's looking around some more, and then he sees a structure that he doesn't recognize in a part of Paris that had been very familiar to him in the past. What was surprising was the glimpse of two enormous pavilions on either side of the street, with grand roofs that seemed to rise out of sight amid a flurry of lights. In his weariness, he imagined he was seeing an array of palaces, huge and orderly and light as crystal, with streaks of light filtering through endless rows of Venetian blinds. Beneath slender pillars, ladders of light rose into the shadow of the lower roof and then soared above it to a higher roof, giving the outline of large square halls where gray slumbering heaps gathered under the glare of brilliant gaslight. And this is, of course, Les Halles. And I'll read just a couple more short passages. This book is quite famous for its descriptions of food. Zola was both obsessed with food, but also critical of the bourgeoisie's obsession with food, which I think is a trend that we have in our own time as well. What does that mean to be overly obsessed with food? It's an interesting question. So there's the famous cheese symphony, which you may have heard. He's describing a cheese shop. I won't read that because that's going to be part of our tour. But and there's one in a tripe shop, and I won't read that one either because if you're not that one's a little bit graphic. But I will read this one about a couple about vegetables. So they're still waiting. They're getting ready to put their to bring their produce in. The bell is ringing, signaling that they need all these vendors who are coming in from several miles away. They need to they can start coming into the market and getting ready to set up for trade. The piles of vegetables were now spilling into the road, with narrow paths between them so that people could pass. The sidewalk was covered end to end with the dark vegetable mounds, but in the flicker of lantern light, you could barely make out the lush fullness of a bouquet of artichokes, the delicate green of the lettuce, the flush coral of carrots, the soft ivory finish of turnips. Flashes of the bright colors skipped across the mounds with the flickering of the light. A crowd had awakened and people were starting to fill up the sidewalk, scrambling among the vegetables, sometimes stopping, at times chattering, occasionally shouting. A loud voice could be heard in the distance, screaming, "Chicory!" The gates of the vegetable pavilion had just been opened, and the retailers who had stalls there, white caps on their heads, shawls knotted under their black coats, and skirts pinned up to protect them from getting dirty, began gathering their day's provisions in the roomy baskets that stood on the floor. These baskets were seen darting in and out between the road and the pavilion, bumping into the heads of bystanders in a thick crowds, the bystanders expressing their displeasure with hoarse complaints that were lost in the growing clamor of increasingly hoarse voices. So there's lots more, many wonderful descriptions of this, but I'll stop there, and I just wanted to show you just one more. This is the one more image that I hope hints at some of what Zola was writing about, and this is Les Halles in 1895 by Léon Lermite, and showing that constant clamor that really went on for almost 800 years in this center part of Paris. I did want to acknowledge the different sources I used here, especially for the images. And I will turn the recording off now and take questions. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Zoom likes to hide the controls. Where did it go? Ah, here we go.